Google the word cannabis and you'll get around 21,900,000 hits. There's news and information articles, forum discussions, advice websites, statistics, videos and photographs, and even games. There's so much about cannabis on the internet, but what actually is it?
I think there's...
It's not surprising people are confused, but this is probably because cannabis isn't one thing.
We all know it's called the bionic, the bomb, the puff, the black, the herb, the sensi, the chronic, the sweet Mary Jane, the shit, the bomb, the ganja, the reefer, the bud, the Buddha, the homegrown, the ill, the Maui Maui, the method, the pot, the shake, the stunt, the stress, the tide.
Hold on. As extensive as that list was, they were all terms for cannabis when used as a drug. But cannabis the plant can do much more than get people high. What do you know about hemp?
There are 3 strains of the plant. There's cannabis sativa, there's cannabis indica, and there's cannabis ruderalis. Those are the 3 strains of the plant. They're all cannabis. I mean, let's not make any bones about it. But I mean, the constituents of each plant is different.
Long ago, when these ancient Grecian temples were new, hemp was already old in the service of mankind. For thousands of years even then, this plant had been grown for cordage and coarse cloth in China and elsewhere in the East.
Hemp can be grown almost anywhere and literally has thousands of uses. In fact, the body of Henry Ford's Husket car built in 1941 was made primarily from hemp plastics. The plastics were lighter than steel yet could withstand 10 times the impact without denting. What's more amazing is many of Ford's cars, like the Model T, were originally designed to run on ethanol fuel made from hemp grown on Henry Ford's own land. In 2001, a hemp-powered car was unveiled at the NORML conference, and it was carbon neutral.
The net carbon dioxide added to the atmosphere is balanced out by the life cycle of the plant.
This really isn't that impressive when you consider that there are racing cars that can be powered by the sun. Hemp fibres are the strongest soft fibres on the face of this planet. It's no surprise then that it's been used in Britain since 400 AD.
The old sailing ships in Nelson's day, I mean, all the ropes were made of hemp, all the sails were made of hemp.
The likelihood is your ancestors probably wore hemp. Clothes made from hemp are UV protective, antibacterial and very strong. For example, clothes made from hemp are 3 times stronger, 4 times warmer and up to 7 times more durable and flame retardant than cotton clothes. These old clothes were recycled into paper, and hemp paper is far superior than paper made from wood. Making paper from trees is kind of a joke. Trees are made from only 30% cellulose, which is what makes paper. The other 70% of the tree must be removed using toxic chemicals. Almost any other plant in nature with a strong stalk is better suited to making paper than trees, especially hemp, because it can be up to 85% cellulose. On top of this, hemp paper will last much longer and doesn't yellow over time. Just 1 acre of hemp can produce as much paper as 4 to 10 acres of trees over a 20-year cycle. This is because hemp stalks only take 4 months to mature, whereas trees can take up to 80 years. 93% of the world's paper comes from trees. And when you consider that deforestation is the biggest cause of climate change, more efficient alternatives like hemp would be ridiculous to overlook.
Stalks like these here on the left, they yield the most fiber and the best.
Oil was produced from these seeds and burnt in lamps. It may also have been used as a folk medicine or for food. Eating hemp seeds is one of the best things you can do for your body. Hemp seeds contain one of the highest sources of protein found in nature, and consuming hemp actually enlarges and clears out the arteries, which can help prevent heart attacks and strokes. That's great, but a food that's good for you, well, it's nothing new. I bet you didn't know that hemp, when used properly, could be one of the smartest building materials in the world.
So what we have here is the hemp shiv, or also called the hurd, which is the internal part of the stem of the plant. And that's mixed with a lime-based binder. And so with that lime-based binder and the hemp, we've got a negative carbon footprint. Now the difference between lime and concrete is that lime you don't have to heat up as much. Concrete you have to heat up to almost 3,000 degrees, which takes a lot of energy and does very poorly on the carbon footprint.
Well, hempcrete actually sequesters carbon. Let me tell you how it does that. First of all, any cellulose material, wood for example, or hemp, takes carbon in during its life cycle, and usually when it decays, it lets it back into the atmosphere. If you take that plant and then put it into a wall, for example in hempcrete, then that carbon is now sequestered in the wall and not becoming part of climate change. So the hempcrete in this building, this one building alone, will sequester 20,000 pounds of carbon. That's a pretty big accomplishment. I think this is the best wall system in the world. So I'm all about hemp. I think hemp's an important thing to push because it's food, fiber, building material. But really I'm choosing this material because it's the best in terms of building science. And why is that true? First of all, because this is what's often called a breathable wall system. And I don't mean breathable for air, we're actually building an airtight wall, but it's breathable for water. And why is that an advantage? Well, in a typical wall, you have a cavity that you seal tightly and then you fill with insulation. Well, water will get inside that cavity because water that's its job in the world. My body's 70% water. It can dissolve any material. Anyway, so what we want to do in a building is create a wall that welcomes water but doesn't rot when it lets the water in, and that's exactly what hempcrete does. When humidity changes in the air outside, the wall can take on that extra humidity and hold it until the humidity drops outside, and then it will let it back out. In the meantime, because the lime is wrapped around the cellulose won't rot.
The lime is trying to go back to being a rock. That means this wall is going to get harder and harder and harder. Over time, it's going to petrify. So these walls will last for thousands of years, not at 40 years like what we're used to building.
So hemp can be grown almost anywhere. It can be used to make clothes more durable than those made from cotton, strong plastics, paper superior to that made from trees, and hempcrete, an amazing new building material. The seeds can be used to make a carbon-neutral biodiesel, or simply eaten as foods. And these are just a few examples of what the cannabis plant can do.
Hemp is one of the oldest and most valuable crops known to man.
So why aren't we seeing more of this plant? There's no easy answers to this question, but we can still take a look. I mean, first of all, do people even want hemp? The oil and wood companies certainly don't. It's competition. And what business wants competition? The largest producer of timber is the United States, where it's illegal to grow hemp, but it hasn't always been that way. In 1937, a marijuana tax stamp was introduced, which effectively started prohibition and made marijuana and hemp the same thing in the eyes of the law. At this time, Mexican workers and black jazz musicians were often associated with the drug.
Have you ever met that funny reefer man? Have you ever met that funny reefer man? If he says he swam to China, wants to sell you South Carolina, then you know you're talking to that reefer man. Have you ever met that funny reefer man? Oh, that funny...
In fact, the M word, marijuana, was created by prohibitionists to tarnish the good image and history of the hemp plant. The decision to introduce the marijuana tax stamp was based on reports by the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Parts of the reports derived from newspapers owned by William Randolph Hearst, who was notorious for yellow journalism. He routinely invented sensational stories, faked interviews, ran phony pictures, and distorted real events. Coincidentally, he also had significant financial interest in the timber industry. This is the most well-known example of how rivaling industries had a huge effect on the law surrounding cannabis. What about the laws in the UK? Can you even grow hemp here? Well, of course we know it grows well here. I suppose the question we should be asking is, are we allowed to? UK law states that if you want to grow hemp, you must get a controlled drug supplier's license from the Home Office. Wait, haven't we seen this before?
Industrial hemp in this country has to have a THC content of less than 0.2%. So the chances of getting stoned off it or there being any effect from it whatsoever are infinitesimal. I mean, typical THC content of something you might smoke for medicinal or for recreational purposes would be, well, a minimum of 10%. So in industrial hemp you've got it below 0.2%.
This means you can't get high from it, yet it's still treated differently to other crops.
So why do you need a license for it? I mean, you need a license for it because it is a cannabis plant and the cannabis plant is banned. I mean, incidentally, the opium poppy is also banned. It's called Papaver somniferum, I believe is the proper name for it. But, I mean, you could walk up and down this street, any suburban street, anywhere in the country, you'll find gardeners cultivating the opium poppy. for ornamental purposes. I'm not suggesting they're using it for anything else, but there's no breaking in the doors and, you know, sending in riot squads of police to stop grandma growing her opium poppies, but she tries to grow a cannabis plant.
Before being given a license, you need a CRB check. We wanted to ask the Home Office why growing hemp requires a criminal record check. Hi, this is Luke Bailey. I'm from a company called Blogtopus. We're making a film about cannabis at the moment. It's educational and it's a documentary about, yeah. You'll put me through. Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I was put through to you. And we were looking for someone from the Home Office to come and talk to us, hopefully. Yeah. On hold again. 01, yeah. No one available. There's going to be absolutely no one. I don't know, man. Like, there's literally nowhere else we can go about assuming stuff. Like, we could compare like laws in like Holland and stuff to the UK law. If they're not going to talk to us, that's like all we can do. So let's start by going back to America, where it's illegal to grow cannabis under federal law. But the law around cannabis changes depending on what state you're in. This is where it gets a little confusing. Cannabis is actually legal to grow, supply, possess and consume for medical purposes in 15 states. California is one of these states where it's legal to possess up to 8 ounces and grow up to 18 plants for medical purposes. Since 1996, when the law was passed, an estimated 150 medical marijuana dispensaries have popped up.
Green crack, sweet silver haze.
Although these businesses are protected by state law, they're still operating illegally according to federal law. Because of this technicality, any federal agent can bust any dispensary anytime they want. Although this has a few hitches, with over 200,000 medical users registered, this system seems to work in California. In Holland, cannabis is not only legally available for medical use, it's subsidised by the government. Just like in California, the law recognises the difference between medical and recreational use. Medical cannabis production is heavily regulated to guarantee its quality and consistency. Dutch doctors are allowed to prescribe medical cannabis.
They support my cannabis use and believe that if something has medicinal value, that we should be allowed to use it. And that's the general view of all Dutch doctors.
Holland also has a booming legal market. People flock from all over the globe to sample their famous weed in coffee shops.
Yes, man, legalize it now. Legalize it.
For the most part, the Dutch are very proud, so it's a very comfortable place to go where they're proud of what they've done with their drug laws. I feel very safe when I'm there.
This market brings in a gross revenue of €2.5 billion every year. Yes, 2.5 billion every year. This adds up to 400 million in government tax on recreational cannabis alone. Now, while other EU countries are making millions from the benefits of a legal cannabis market, we're spending millions on maintaining an illegal one.
There is no more obvious waste in public expenditure than the 19 billion per annum cost of the UK's war on drugs. Wherever anything is prohibited, the price goes up and criminals get involved.
The problem doesn't improve, it gets worse.
You know, the prohibition of alcohol in the States in 1920 created gangsterism. It wasn't until alcohol was prohibited that the rise of gangsters and Al Capone and all the rest came along. And exactly the same thing's happening with cannabis.
It's all too easy to discuss organised crime without really understanding what's going on. These people work in human trafficking, slavery, torture, murder. It's a very dark reality. And the fact is that most of it's being funded by cannabis now because it's such low risk and you can make so much money. And of course the police should be stopping these people, but it's a product of prohibition.
Imagine the infrastructure that's grown up around prohibition, it will be huge, and it'll be like unknotting a huge ball of string, you know, to stop prohibition. I'm not jealous. I mean, I'd love to be involved to hit that switch, but God, I don't want to be involved at the same time. What a mess.
So, when did cannabis become such a huge problem in the UK?
It started, I think it was in 1925, the International Convention on Narcotic Substances or something, which was before the formation of the United Nations. It was connected with the League of Nations, which was the forerunner of the UN. And it was basically a treaty to control opium, heroin, morphine, those other things. And at the last minute, as I understand it, the Egyptian representative in this committee threw in hashish or cannabis because the opposition party, the opposition political party in Egypt at that particular time was associated with the use of hashish. And so it was very much a political measure. It was thrown in and just quickly added on the end, as it were, and from that moment on cannabis became illegal.
Cannabis has always been at that interface of politics and science and evidence, and it's been a kind of test case for the last 30 years about drug policy. So I served on the ACMD for 10 years. During that 10 years we did 3 reviews of cannabis. The first one said cannabis shouldn't be a Class A drug, as it was, some of it was in those days, or a Class B, it should be a Class C drug. It was downgraded to Class C in 2004. The press, some of the press hated it, and there's been a battle then to get it reclassified. We reviewed it again and said no, it should stay as Class C. New government, Gordon Brown comes in and starts telling everyone it's lethal. Reviewed it again, said no, it should stay as Class C, but the political pressure then just completely, they just ignored the recommendations and said, well, you know, we do politics and politicians can actually do what they like. And they completely disregarded the evidence. And then, of course, I got sacked for saying that this was actually was quite ridiculous, really.
Now, the government's chief advisor on drugs policy has been sacked after insisting that alcohol and cigarettes are more dangerous than cannabis and ecstasy. The Home Secretary, Alan Johnson, said he no longer had confidence in the advice being given by Professor David Nutt, who'd also criticised ministers for reclassifying cannabis as a more serious drug. Daniel Sanford reports.
The trouble began when the government blatantly ignored its scientists' advice on cannabis.
Our drugs policy needs to be fact and evidence-based. Now, you'd think that was just complete common sense, wouldn't you? I mean, can you conceive of a government that wouldn't have a drug policy that was fact and evidence-based? It just seems utterly ridiculous. Well, ours isn't. You know, and it's not just me saying that. The Public Accounts Committee and the National Audit Office have both publicly criticised the government for having a policy, a drugs policy, that is not based on facts or evidence, but is based on politicians' opinions.
I was asked to resign. I refused because I thought that was inappropriate. You know, I mean, you should sack me or not sack me. I'm not going to take responsibility for not doing the job I was supposed to do. So the circumstances were that I essentially challenged the government's position on 2 things: on the reclassification of cannabis and the government's policy, instigated by Jackie Smith and Gordon Brown, to criminalise people as a deterrent against cannabis use. I mean, you may not know this, but in 2004 there were about 85,000 people got criminal records for cannabis possession. And then Jackie Smith decided that she was going to increase police pressure on cannabis users. So in the next 4 years, the numbers went up year on year. To 2007, it was 160,000. So she doubled convictions, and that was an explicit policy of that government to use criminal sanctions to deter people from using cannabis. And I thought that was really quite disgusting and inhumane and completely pointless, because criminalising people causes much more harm to them than smoking a few joints.
Cannabis would really harm somebody if they were a teenager and they got 5-year jail sentence. That would be very harmful to put them in that sort of environment. They're more likely to come out suffering with some psychotic illness after that.
Yeah, they thought government advisors should do what governments tell them. I took the view that government advisors should tell the governments the truth, and they don't want the truth.
After Professor Nutt left, there was fear of mass resignations. The government's drug policy was described as in tatters as other members of the board walked.
One of the things that really worries me is that these new synthetic drugs are being banned without anyone knowing anything about them, simply because they exist. And I think that's very unscientific. So I've set up this new committee called the Independent Scientific Committee on Drugs, which is developing a set of guidelines for how we should assess new drugs. And I'm really hoping that those will become the sort of definitive guidelines for the ACMD. So we need to wait and see how things shake out. But obviously I'm concerned if they get rid of scientists. But we don't know exactly what they're going to do at present.
Within the midst of this political confusion, we've missed the most obvious thing. We haven't even talked about the plant itself yet. So what are the dangers and what are the facts?
Okay, so what do you think the dangers of cannabis are?
Addiction and then wasting your life.
Perhaps like schizophrenia or paranoia. I'm not really too sure though.
It can lead to severe relaxation in people.
Loss of
It could lead you on to harder drugs as well. I guess a bit of a cliche, but I think it's true.
I know it's like bad for your lungs.
I think it's like poison.
I think the worst danger is the brain damage.
There's been a lot of misinformation about cannabis in the brain, deliberately trying to scare people off using it. This idea that it somehow kills cells in the brain and damages the brain. As far as we know, that's a complete myth. And some people even now think it may be what we call neuroprotective. It may actually protect the brain against some of the damage which occurs for other reasons. And that's because in the brain there are billions of receptors for the substance that cannabis works on, the THC receptor.
Your brain is almost as if it's just waiting for the right key to come and fit the lock. And then cannabis just fits those receptors perfectly.
And the brain makes a natural series of substances which work on those receptors, and they seem to have a very critical role in keeping the brain working properly.
And the most remarkable thing is that we now understand that cannabinoids are fundamental to most aspects of life, certainly fundamental to all the neurological processes and all the immune system processes within our bodies. The only naturally occurring source of cannabinoids outside the body is the cannabis plant. You can't get it from anywhere, can't get them from anywhere else.
Some people think it's very addictive, but it isn't particularly addictive. It's not as addictive as alcohol, certainly not as addictive as tobacco or heroin.
I think it's habit forming, but then anything that's nice is habit forming.
People often think it causes cancer, and of course smoking can always cause mouth cancer and lung cancer, but it doesn't cause anything like as much cancer as tobacco.
But the latest research shows some quite remarkable things about cannabis and smoking. Seems to indicate that cannabis may actually protect smokers from the carcinogenic effects of tobacco. Psychosis is just the latest scare story. I mean, they used to say, go back to the 20s and 30s, they used to say that cannabis makes white women promiscuous with black men.
Welcome to the Brain Warehouse. Provide new brains for
the Freak Out Free X50. You know, back in the old days, before these came out, you lost it on weed and phew, that was it. Imagine that. You want it installed?
With stronger strains than ever before, the more you mess with cannabis, the more it could mess with your mind.
There's no doubt that THC has the potential for creating some sort of psychotic effects, but CBD, which is alongside THC in almost all cannabis, has antipsychotic effects.
So plants have been developed which have a much stronger concentration of the active ingredient delta-9 THC than they used to have previously. But you're also losing the other elements which might moderate or protect or subtly change the impact of the THC. So skunk is a double whammy, and it's certainly different to the old forms of cannabis.
Although newer strains of cannabis do contain less of the psychoprotective components than before, they very rarely actually cause a mental illness. But they could aggravate symptoms of a pre-existing condition such as schizophrenia.
Many people with schizophrenia find that if they smoke cannabis, their symptoms get worse. For instance, they often hear voices, and often their voices get either louder or they get more of them when they're stoned. But that doesn't mean that the cannabis has caused schizophrenia. In fact, in very few cases does cannabis actually make the illness. What it does is aggravate those symptoms. But I would say one other thing, and I think we've got into a nasty position recently in Britain where we're kind of blaming people with schizophrenia for causing their illness by smoking cannabis. And that's really quite offensive, because in reality, many people with schizophrenia find that cannabis is the only thing that helps deal with the other symptoms of schizophrenia, the anxiety, the tension, the pointlessness of their lives. So even though they know it makes some symptoms worse, they still use it because the net benefit is positive. And I think we should be very cautious about blaming people for using cannabis just because doctors think it makes things worse, because it may not in other areas of their illness.
There's no doubt that as far as children or young people are concerned, while your brain's still growing and developing, any substance you take that's psychoactive is potentially harmful. I mean, that's self-evident, it's common sense.
Do you think most drug dealers care about age restrictions or like how stable someone is?
Not really. I think the overall view is that you're just sort of fishing for money really, and whenever you get a bite, you just pull no matter what.
Sensibly determining how you might use the drug is actually quite difficult when it's illegal.
What we desperately need is a regulated system.
But there's another question about skunk which people get quite exercised about. People think that because it's stronger, it will necessarily have more effect in the brain. Well, that's true, of course, if you smoke the same amount. But the analogy I would make is the difference between, say, beer and wine. So wine is usually 3 times as strong as beer. But people don't necessarily get more drunk on wine because they don't necessarily drink this. You know, if you drank a pint of wine, then you get more drunk. But most people know the strength and therefore moderate their intake.
Seems like common sense. But alcohol and tobacco kill millions every year globally. So how many does cannabis kill?
1,000 people?
Yeah, less than 100, more than 50.
100,000?
Every day of the week, people die of cannabis.
100,000.
It's been said 1,000,000 times before, but we'll say it again.
No one, we think, has ever died of smoking cannabis.
So the therapeutic ratio of cannabis, in other words, how much you have to take to kill yourself, is absurd. I mean, you know, you'd have to consume so much that it would just be ridiculous.
Cannabis is less harmful than alcohol and tobacco, yet for possession you can face a maximum of 5 years in prison and an unlimited fine. Cannabis is very much illegal, yet everything that isn't actually cannabis itself, but cannabis related, is entirely legal. We're here in Camden Town, one of the thousands of places in the UK selling bongs, grinders, baggies, stash boxes, rolling papers, all for smoking cannabis. And they're not even trying to hide it. So we've just come from one of the shops on Camden Road and we've got some smoking rolling papers here. They've got, this one's got like small cannabis designs along here. They're both pure hemp, so they're actually made from cannabis. And we've also got a grinder which has got, I don't know if you can see that, a little cannabis leaf there. So obviously what you do is you put your cannabis in here and just grind it up. And there's no real other use for this really. I mean, you could use it for grinding up herbs in your kitchen, but it's got a cannabis leaf on the front. And yeah, it was just, I just walked in and put my money on the table and they were given to me really. But these are for people who smoke cannabis. Surely those who grow it will be less obvious. Well, not really. In fact, you can buy everything you need to grow cannabis from your high street, even the seeds.
Well, this is a grow shop, yeah?
Yeah.
And you can find here everything, pretty much everything that you need to grow your favorite plant at home.
Okay.
Yeah, any equipment, lighting, ventilation, growing media.
What's the attraction to growing indoors for people? Why do they do it?
Mainly in this country that you cannot rely much on the daylight.
Yeah, on the weather.
On the weather, yeah. So growing indoors is an alternative to have pretty much any type of plants.
Okay.
tropical plants, anything that you want.
Okay. So you can
have it
just grow any plant you want indoors.
Exactly.
Okay, alright, well we've got loads more stuff over here. We've got big bags of Cannacaregiverdeb Professional Plus. The name Canna that we've got written on some of this soil, where does that come from?
Well, it's a Dutch company, yeah, so I believe that's like a marketing thing to attract more customers.
Okay, so the people who might be wanting to grow this.
Yeah, but people might associate with some type of
plants.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
And then next to it, this big thing here, it's a carbon filter. What?
That's a carbon filter, exactly. It works in line with the extractor.
Yeah.
So the extractor is going to be sucking the air out of the tanks through the carbon filter.
Okay.
And when the air passes here, it's going to kill all the smell.
Kill all the smell?
Yeah.
Okay, so people don't want the plant smell getting around their house.
Yes, plants that smell strong, when the air comes out from the other end of the extractor, it's going to be clean. This is a complete setup. It's a controlled environment for you to grow your plants. You got pretty much everything here. The tent with reflective material inside to have less waste of electricity and light. You have here a carbon filter, like that one to kill the smell. Here on top of the tent is the extractor.
So this is
reflector light.
This is the whole kit. This is everything you need to start growing. So how much would this kind of setup cost someone if they wanted to start?
About £300 you can start growing.
And that's for everything?
Everything, including even soil and fertilizer. That's organic setup from £300.
Big question, I'm just going to come out and say it. We've been to a lot of cannabis grow-ups, and the equipment that you sell here is pretty much identical to the stuff that we see over there. Does that surprise you at all that people are using this kind of equipment to grow cannabis?
It doesn't surprise me. I don't really talk to my customers about what they're growing. Sometimes when they come to me and say, you know, I want to grow. Well, you know what I want to grow. I said, I don't know, and I don't want to, mate. I can give advice on how to grow plants in general.
Yeah, but
I cannot give advice in any illegal activity. Pretty much all grow shops, they have a copy of this magazine.
So all the hydroponic grow shops?
Yeah.
Okay.
Soon after you open the magazine, you're gonna see the page 3 girl.
Jamaican Dream is our page 3 girl. You can see just the amount of legitimate businesses. We've got a seed company advertising here. We've got, this is a little thing to set up your indoor closet grows. This is like how to convert. We've got some people posing by plants. There's this whole cannabis culture, and it's underground, but it's well established. So it seems that cannabis is definitely part of the business, I suppose. Or that you understand that people are going to be buying stuff.
You cannot be naive saying that no, people don't come here to buy equipment to grow their own weed.
Yeah.
You cannot be naive at this point, you know? But we cannot support this as well.
Okay. You can do everything but give them advice about weed. You can sell them everything they need.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. So, you know, this is a legitimate business. They've got a stock room, they're selling stuff online and in a physical shop to just people who want to be growing for all sorts of reasons. There are obviously people who are going to be wanting to grow cannabis here. But, you know, it's all legitimate and it's all getting taxed, and, you know, there's nothing shady about any of this. We've got this called Canna Boost, and it's nutrition for your cannabis plant. It's designed for cannabis, and I presume it's being bought by people growing cannabis. And you know, it's completely legitimate. Like, we've got quite an intelligent design for the packaging. We've got a little extra bit here so you can measure out how much you need to put in your plant at each time. So we're just getting a cup of tea in the cannabis grow shop. I'm a little bit shocked, I'm gonna have to admit. This is not what I expected. I expected to come and it to be some dodgy guys selling some dodgy stuff at dodgy prices to some dodgy people, but in fact it's this lovely guy and his wife who just set up their first business, and you know, a lot of the stuff's going to people who are growing cannabis and they're not doing anything wrong, and it's quite strange, I suppose, just to be in a room where this is going to go to a cannabis grower. You know, that's probably going to go to a cannabis grower. These lights are probably going to go to a cannabis grower, but it's okay. looking through all of this stuff, like I totally get why people would want to grow. Like, I thought, you know, it'd be so cool to just get some of this and just grow some peppers or something, but then it's like 300 quid for a setup, and I'm not paying 300 quid to grow some peppers.
You'd get fat peppers.
Yeah, you get the best peppers in the world.
Yeah.
You get incredible peppers, but they'd still just be peppers.
Very good peppers.
Amazing peppers. Right, so you've got products in here with the word like canna on them and all these nutrients that are designed for cannabis growing, and you can sell it all legally and all your customers are allowed to buy it, but where does the law say no, this is now illegal? Where's the cut-off point?
Well, the law says that you cannot germinate one cannabis seed. You can buy all your equipment, you can buy all your fertilizers, but you cannot germinate your seed. You can buy your seed, but you cannot germinate.
So as soon as you put your seed in the soil and add some water,
then you become a criminal.
So, you've just bought your first hemp clothes. Well done, you're not a criminal. You've just bought a bong to smoke some weed out of. You're still not a criminal. You've just bought everything you need to grow cannabis, even the seeds. Well done, you're an upstanding citizen. You set up everything and it's all in place ready for growing. Well done, you're still not a criminal. You get one of your seeds and you put it in some soil. What made you think you could do that? It's clear we're in an odd situation here. But the problem is, we can't stop people growing cannabis if they really want to, no matter what their intentions are.
I'm not suggesting that there ought to be a complete free-for-all. It is a psychoactive substance, you know. I mean, if you abuse it, it can cause harm, just like if you abuse anything.
There are certain people that shouldn't use cannabis, but generally speaking, prohibition doesn't help these people in the way a regulated system would. Cannabis is a Class B drug, which leads most of us to believe it's pretty dangerous. It's obvious then that any idea of medical benefits goes out the window.
Cannabis is probably the oldest medicine. We think it's been used in medicinal practice for over 4,000 years. It does many things.
Queen Victoria famously used a tincture of cannabis for her menstrual pains.
And it was perfectly accepted throughout society. It was prescribed for people with asthma, all sorts of treatments it was used for, and now it's not accepted at all.
The history of cannabis in medicine in Britain is a really sad one. It was a legal medicine until 1971. And then a couple of GPs in London who were very pro-cannabis, they started prescribing it for non-medicinal reasons. They started giving it to people, and it was then in a liquid form. And they said, drop the liquid onto your cigarettes and smoke it. So they were trying to make cannabis legal, and they subverted medicinal cannabis for pleasure. And the government then reacted, as many governments do, completely overreacted, irrationally, and it banned medicinal cannabis to stop what was a trivial diversion of medicinal cannabis onto the market. And the government said, well, if we ban cannabis medicines, we'll stop people using cannabis. Now, in 1971, about 500,000 of the 50 million people in Britain had ever tried cannabis. It gets banned. 40 years down the line, almost half of the people in Britain have used cannabis. So the ban had no impact on use. But what it did do was mean that people who needed cannabis for medicinal purposes ended up getting criminalised.
There must be tens of thousands of people in this country, possibly even as many as 100,000 people using cannabis for medicinal purposes.
Although not willing to be interviewed for this report, Home Office ministers worry the drug is addictive and increases the risk of psychosis. Cannabis, they conclude, has no medical benefit in herbal form.
The government's position is completely absurd. I mean, there's no other word for it. You know, they say that there are no medicinal benefits in cannabis, yet on the other hand, they've recently approved Sativex, which is cannabis. They've dressed it up in a physical package and a marketing package to try and pretend, if you like, that they say it's a cannabis-based medicine. You know, they say it's an extract of two cannabinoids, THC and CBD. You know, but in actual fact, what it is technically, it's what's called a cannabis tincture. And all that happens is they take herbal cannabis, chop it up finely, soak it in alcohol, heat it gently. They then filter the result and call it Sativex, but Sativex is cannabis.
It's hardly being used at all because it's expensive and it's not on what we call formularies for most hospitals or for most general practices. But at least now people can have that prescribed.
Although Sativex is a step in the right direction, it's far from the legal cannabis you see in California or Holland. The problem with cannabis is that it works best in its natural form, and you can't patent a plant. This means that pharmaceutical companies can't make money from it, because people would just grow it themselves. Sativex make their money by processing cannabis, making it more expensive and less beneficial. And who does this affect most? The patients.
This is the UK's first medical cannabis testimonial. My name is Sarah Martin. I have relapsing remitting MS, which I treat quite successfully by using cannabis.
We went to meet Sarah.
Cannabis takes away enough of the symptom to make life bearable. I'm not stiff, I'm not cramping. A lot of the pins and needles has been taken away. That's one of the most annoying symptoms. The numbness recedes a little bit. That allows me to think, wow, things actually feel great again, you know? And that's cannabis that does that.
Illegal cannabis. However, Sarah was nice enough to invite us and our cameras into her grow room.
Where's the goddamn key? Yeah, that's it. Different plants completely.
Smells like Kew Gardens.
I grow my own cannabis because I'm given no choice. If I didn't grow, I'd have to buy street cannabis, which is frequently contaminated. All the powerful nutrients that they feed them with have not been properly flushed from the plant, and I'd be ingesting that substance or breathing it into my lungs. So I grow my own so I can ensure the clean medicinal quality of the plant. Only a 400 watt light, nothing fancy.
And how much did this cost you to set up all of it together?
Tents 100, lights 150, maybe less. Plants are free, all donated seeds.
If Sarah didn't grow her own cannabis, she'd have to go to the streets to get her medicine.
Wherever it comes from is never necessarily known, and obviously its growing conditions and strains are never as well known as they could be.
The imperative for some sort of regulation of medicinal cannabis is urgent. It's not about my selfish, recreational activity, the fact that I like getting stoned. It's about the fact that there are people out there in pain and suffering, in desperate need of the relief that cannabis offers them.
I use cannabis because it eases all the symptoms associated with MS without the horrific side effects that many pharmaceuticals provide.
Cannabis is almost always safer than the pharmaceutical alternatives.
My consultant neurologist doesn't even like me to use pharmaceuticals. They've never been recommended to me by a consultant neurologist because they are all aware of how harmful they can be.
One of the reasons cannabis is a safe drug is that it cannot kill you an overdose. Unlike alcohol, where 4 times the driving limit can result in death.
Prescription drugs in Britain may be responsible for 1,200 deaths per year.
My doctor, she gave me some antispasm pills that I still have upstairs that she said, take them as an absolute last resort, and I never have, because the way she said it just said to me, these are dangerous, only take them if you really need to.
And what do your doctors think about you using cannabis?
I get support, full support. It makes me healthy and they see it. I go and see them, they can see me healthy. And yet they can't recommend cannabis because of the law.
Sarah's not the only one. There's a surprisingly big community online of medical cannabis users.
Even though people like me had the courage to stand up and say, look, I'm helping people, I'm growing cannabis, I put it in the post, and blah blah blah. The police didn't come and drag me into a cell, nobody from government phoned and said, what are you doing? They just went, oh, don't make a fuss, maybe she'll go away.
Yeah.
And I frankly cannot see any reason why people shouldn't smoke cannabis to help them if it does help them.
Well, you don't have to smoke it. I mean, obviously you can eat it, you can take it transdermally, you can create an ointment or a gel which can be rubbed on the skin. It can be rubbed directly, you know, if it's for muscular pains or something, it can be rubbed directly on the area which hurts or is inflamed. The other technique is vaporizing.
Blows hot air at 190 degrees centigrade, and that just encourages a vapour from the plant. Absolutely no combustion whatsoever. And a little mouthpiece goes on.
What would you do without cannabis?
I wouldn't bother living.
It's ridiculous for a drug which is as pretty harmless as cannabis not to be available for people who have medical need.
It's unjust, it's cruel, it's more than cruel, it's evil, and something's got to be done about it.
All walks of society use cannabis. We don't look like anything or anybody. We look like everyone.
We've done 3 months worth of research for this film, and it's still not clear to us yet why we put ourselves at such a disadvantage both medically and industrially in terms of cannabis, just to stop a few people getting high.
In a world at the minute where there is no money, we keep being told, as it were, and we all owe a shitload. Growing a big old farm of green and selling it as a cash crop, with the tax there, that could fucking bail out a lot of people.
So we're in a strange situation where everyone knows that the law is wrong, but no one has the courage to say the law is wrong, let's change it. So you have this sort of kind of ratchet effect with each of the two major parties trying to out-muscle the other on being a hard drug because they think that will give them some votes. In practice it probably doesn't, but they've got stuck in that mindset. They cannot think clearly about it.
Cannabis gives me a way to live.
All we need is some clarity. We need some clarity and some truth. And then the benefits of cannabis become self-evident.